present to you CSR and the industry trends before Natalie, our principal consultant, will present to you the competitor analysis. Then we will move on to the financial cost-benefit analysis before recommending 3 strategies with key areas to address in implementation. So firstly, social responsibility creates shared value between the corporation and stakeholders in an ethical way. There are 3 domains to consider. First is social, economical, and environmental, which make up the triple bottom line. Now, CSR is not static. Expectations can change due to social expectations. But as well as this, a study says that the higher the profile of the brand, the more likely it is to receive criticism. As well as this, corporations find that it is hard balancing the moral and the ethical values between the corporation and its stakeholders. So there are 3 key industry trends to address. Firstly, with the increase of the internet and the use of smart devices, more consumers are looking up what they're buying and who they're buying from. As well as this, information can be spread very quickly. Secondly, with attention to climate change, more corporations are creating sustainable supply chains with positive support from consumers. And lastly, sourcing remains the key critical success factor. Now, although it is more cost effective to outsource to developing countries with low labour costs, this brings a number of risks, which includes worker protests and some political corruption. Now, Natalie will give the competitor analysis.
So tables 1.1 and 1.4 of the handout, we've done a competitive assessment of the brands that Global One have identified for each of its 5 brands. So from that, we've developed the following observations and recommendations, having examined CSR policy as well as activist criticisms. So Global Oz and Global Oz Decor are situated in markets where there is a definite trend towards ethical sourcing from underdeveloped nations. So we would recommend that Global One make comparable commitments to meet the benchmark set by its competitors. Regarding Le Femme and Provogue, there is significantly less media attention to ethical issues in these markets, and no competitors have any discernible competitive advantage based on corporate responsibility. As such, these brands may be considered low priority. Although it's understood that Global One would intend to pursue a company-wide CSR policy, this assessment has revealed the areas that should be prioritised. Furthermore, there's a potential risk in engaging in CSR. Take, for instance, H&M. H&M recently opened their Auckland store in New Zealand, and they had protesters outside of it, indicating that companies that do have CSR policies and widely publicise these policies are still subject to activist action and media attention when they're not seen to be delivering on their commitments. Furthermore, a CSR policy could enable Global One to tackle the increasing amount of social media activism and consumer exposure to such campaigns. For instance, this year's Fashion Revolution campaign reached 129 million individuals through its hashtag during its annual campaigning week and had responses from 372 mainstream brands. That's referred to in figure 2.1 in the handout, and as according to figure 2.2 in the handout, the Australian Ethical Fashion Guide 2016 also indicates that there's an increasing number of companies engaging in transparency and responding to consumer demands. There's an overall indication that Global One's competing brands are responding both online and in their voluntary CSR policies to these growing consumer trends. And so therefore we believe that the CSR policy has absolute merit for Global One in joining this trend and also in abating any activist risks. I would now like to introduce our analyst Tristan, who will quantify the cost benefit for this project.
According to the financial ratio analysis, companies' liquidity seems to be fallen since 2005. However, it is still at healthy levels. Profitability ratio rose significantly throughout the years, showing that Global One is efficient in generating profits. Moreover, increase in debt to equity ratio and a downward trend of dividend payout ratio could signal a negative outlook of the company to the shareholders. Overall, an upward trend of free cash flow shows that Global One has excess cash for necessary implementation of CSR policy. We are planning to use NPV technique as our investment appraisal strategy. Firstly, we have to identify the CSR benefits and cost value drivers. Research has shown that CSR implementation could substantially increase 2 to 5% of the company's sales, ROA, and profit margin. Remarkably, IKEA sales increases by 29% in 2015. Based on current CSR expenditure trends, we could use India's Corporation Act 2013 as a benchmark, where it is mandatory to spend 2% of the company's net profits on CSR activities. Thus, we are looking at an expected total expenditure of $330 million. Lastly, compute the NPV using a formula above with management projected benefits and costs. From this cost-benefit analysis, we suggest that Global One should explore CSR implementation. Here now is Scott, our engagement manager, and Sam, our senior analyst, who will explore the merit of implementing different CSR strategies.
Thank you, Tristan. So we've established that Global One should implement a formal CSR policy. The next stage is addressing a few key areas that we think Global One should consider, and considering the potential associated cultural and fiscal challenges that may arise due to these. The base level of our strategy is all about risk mitigation. This is a low-cost strategy that can be implemented fairly rapidly. The second level of our strategy involves leveraging an investment in CSR in order to add value to the company. This will take longer and will require additional investment. The top level of our strategy involves shifting from a singular focus on financial outcomes to a dual focus on financial and social impact outcomes. This will require Global One to forego more profitable ventures in order to invest in more socially acceptable investments. The strategy is designed as well so that Global One can progress through each stage to their desired level of implementation. Our base level, our risk mitigation strategy, involves strategies that reduce the risk of financial and reputational detriment to the company whilst meeting the minimum legal requirements. This strategy enables Global One to focus on its financial growth objectives and its geographical expansion with little resource diversion. The strategy involves legal compliance in terms of wages, working conditions and working hours, minimising activist risk, which involves identifying and addressing local and online issues, and implementing a risk management system, which will involve a regulatory system and having action plans in place to deal with any negative exposure to PR. Fiscally, this doesn't present significant challenges. However, culturally, this may lead to employee dissatisfaction as they see this as a feeble attempt at a CSR policy and may feel that their rights aren't being valued.
Thanks, Scott. Option 2, company integration, requires Global One to go beyond the basics of legal compliance and risk mitigation. This strategy will require significant more investment, more transparency, and a pledge to make an actual difference in the communities in which Global One operates. The company-wide integration strategy will require the formation of meaningful partnerships with reputable charities and foundations, increased transparency through triple bottom line reporting and public CSR website information, sustainable supply chain management, and funded CSR programs, which may include things like work education programs or disaster relief clothing initiatives. Fiscal challenges faced when implementing this strategy is that capital has to be diverted away from profitable investments to fund the relevant CSR initiatives. Moreover, negotiations must be made with suppliers, which can be time-consuming. Option 3, CSR leadership, is our ultimate level of CSR implementation. CSR leadership requires substantial business and cultural re-evaluation. This strategy views CSR as a core business objective that's equal to the objectives of financial growth. The CSR leadership strategy requires the integration of CSR initiatives into every function of the business. The It requires absolute buy-in, Global One leadership and all of Global One stakeholders. It requires the alignment of business objectives and CSR objectives, and requires development of CSR into the corporate culture. The major benefit of this strategy is that Global One will be the leader of the socially conscious consumer goods market, an area of consumer goods which is increasing. This is because consumers will know they are receiving social value that goes beyond the price of the goods that they pay. This level of implementation will require significant restructure of business operations, including sourcing, manufacturing, transport and distribution, and this will be costly for Global One. Culturally, management at every level needs to find a balance between profit generation and social change. Summarise our presentation.
Thank you, Sam. I'd like to summarise our findings by capturing what we've discussed so far, apply it directly to the case of Global One, and illustrate how our recommendation will continue to allow Global One to achieve its objective of continued growth. This slide provides the brands, suppliers and markets that need to be addressed dependent on the level of commitment to CSR, while highlighting the tasks involved for each of these strategies. The choice is your responsibility. However, our research, analysis and evaluation does coerce a company-wide CSR strategy for Global One. Therefore, senior management should foster a consistent approach across all the brands. The breakdown of a CSR policy was highlighted by Natalie, as one of Global Oz's competitors, H&M, was exposed by failing to show their company-wide commitment. Thus, with such a large network of suppliers, Global One must act to ensure all suppliers are striving to achieve working conditions in order to reduce risk and improve relationships within new and existing markets and communities in which you operate in. To further illustrate the viability of this solution, Global Oz's competitor Gap has shown they can turn hostile relationships with suppliers into empowered commitments to CSR practices throughout their supply chain. In doing so, they were able to achieve increased profitability through increased sales, attracting and retaining quality employees and improved productivity. Global One has a proven track record to adapting to consumer needs at speed. We believe Global One will be able to do this again with CSR across their brands by marrying the appropriate social cause with consumer segments. This will allow Global One to leverage their commitment in markets that are more willing to buy goods backed by CSR practices. This will take investment beyond compliance, CSR initiatives and transparency through triple bottom line reporting. A consumer study conducted by Nielsen quotes that it's no longer a question if consumers care about social impact. Consumers do care and they show through their actions. Global One, it's now your time to put our words into actions. Growth, CSR and profitability can be achieved together. I'd like to thank you today for coming along. If you have any other questions at all, please do not hesitate to ask us. And if you'd like to get in contact for further inquiries down the track, please just get in contact with Matt, our principal.
Can I ask a question about the cost of implementing CSR? Given the intense competition in this sort of fast fashion industry, how price sensitive do you think this is, in terms of the costs being added to the price of garments and etc.? Do you not think that there is some sort of degree of price sensitivity in the community? Like I know a group of students at university in a subject called BEX3500 that have said to me that, when it comes to buying cheap, that's what they look for. So how do you reconcile that sort of thinking and the added cost to your garments?
Well, I can take a start of it. I guess for us also looking at, now that you guys are introducing or looking to go down an online path, there was a study conducted that showed that 50 to 55% of consumers across the world are willing to pay more for CSR-backed goods. So we do think it is a feasible solution in the fact that they are looking to pay a premium on those goods.
Adding to that, they also found that 70% of millennials who are young people like us, segment of the market that's growing, so we're looking for more business looking to the future when millennials purchasing power begins to peak, I think it's going to be in the best interest of Global One to implement CSR, whether or not that's cost to the business as well.
So do you know that those customers who you've just said are willing to pay a price premium are actually the customers of this company? Is the demographic the same for the survey as it is for your actual, my customers?
Based on our competitor assessment, the competitors identified with Global Oz were the same companies that millennials do shop at. So H&M, I think it was Gap, Topshop, they're all kind of for that demographic.
One thing you haven't mentioned clearly, and I'm staying in role, okay, is the impact on my shareholders. Okay, so we're assuming that customers will pay a price premium, but my shareholders, are they going to sort of say, oh look, profits are going to go down, let's get out of this company because it's not going to be as successful as it has been in the past? What's the risk mitigation against adverse shareholder reaction?
It's definitely was one of our big considerations. Looked at it in a couple of different ways. These days you have to take into account that there are plenty of green investors out there, which are investors that will only really invest in companies that show that they have a commitment to social responsibility and sustainability. So to get that additional investment from that group of investors, we feel that you need to implement a formal CSR policy. In terms of your current investors, we see the first two levels of our strategy, the risk mitigation and company-wide integration, as adding value to the company, particularly a recommended level mid-tier company-wide integration. Despite the investment into a formal CSR policy and the diversion of funds away from, everyday activities towards implementing this policy and maintaining it, we still see this as down the track, reducing the overall risk of the company and its exposure to these PR disasters, and essentially adding value to the company. And we would expect this to increase the share price of the company if done correctly.
As well as this, studies have shown that to increase the compliance with shareholders and to open up their acceptance to CSR policies, a key thing is to be totally transparent with your shareholders. So be clear on what you're implementing, what this might affect, and what you're still working on, and maybe the areas that you might not be so good at doing right now but are looking forward to improving in the future.
Thank you. That was a great answer. I forgot my name. I wrote it down on a piece of paper somewhere. I'm Anthony, as you know, I'm the new
General Manager Online Services.
General Manager of Online Services, which is why I dropped a piece of paper before. I'm not used to this old-fashioned technology. One thing that I was concerned about in general with the presentation was the view that CSR was a trade-off against profitability, and that it was because that's a dichotomy that generally doesn't exist. But you explained that really very well. I mean, you look at well, as I said in my job interview with you, Mr. Managing Director, I pointed out that. You look at a firm like Ford, which has just stopped manufacturing in Australia just this week, closed its factories. A large part of the reason for that, it was nothing to do with government, although everybody's racing around blaming politicians. It's not so much to do with government. They were making the wrong products because they were unable to export anymore, because the products that they were making consumed too much petrol. They couldn't export to Europe as they used to. They breached the European standards. People in Australia weren't buying either because they were chewing up too much petrol as well. So had they invested in more environmentally sensitive products, they may well still be in business in Australia for many years to come. Now they're just an importer, same as any other. From an online point of view, with my hat as a general manager,
at some of the potential risks that social media can bring up these days, particularly in regards to your current issues, which are big in the media, which are your working conditions. Workers, particularly when you look at Global One, which is a company that outsources a lot of their production. This is a huge concern should be a huge concern for the company in terms of the working conditions of these workers. With the way that social media is trending, one bad situation can go viral very quickly, can spread through social media, make it onto your headline news, newspapers, and do significant reputational damage to the company, and seriously hurt the reputation and the loyalty that you have with your existing customers. So part of our risk mitigation strategy is to build measures that will reduce the risk of that, and one of our regulatory systems is our issue identification system, which works to highlight issues in local areas and online, and to determine which stage these issues are in, and ideally you have an action plan in place to deal with the issue as it arises. Another one of our recommendations is that Global One invests in a social media team, so to speak, that works around the clock 24/7. Depending on which level of strategy you want to go with, at the risk mitigation level, it would involve just negating the negative social media and negative PR that the company has coming its way, and trying to stop that spread. The further up you go, the more investment it'll be in preventative measures over sort of reactive measures. But of course that comes with an additional cost, but it is definitely something we recommend.
I think that's a tremendous recommendation, because these people will be reporting to me, and I hope the Managing Director is listening very carefully to it. Thank you very much indeed. Perfect answer. Seriously, it was a very good answer.
I just wouldn't mind picking up on something that a point that you made, which is, I think, very pertinent going forward. And I don't know about the other members of the panel, but I'm inclined towards your option around the company-wide CSR, given the kind of future that we face. You've made the point that systems and processes will need to be changed, tweaked, and I think what you said about instant retrieval of issues is absolutely critical, so I commend you for pointing to that. What I haven't heard a lot about, and maybe you could elaborate on this, somebody could, is just some of the other perhaps pluses and minuses and strategies that you will need to use to get the company on board with this. This is huge if it's a company-wide strategy. So, did you have suggestions in mind? I'm thinking professional training and so on, which I haven't heard much about.
I can so from our perspective, the reason why we go company-wide, first of all, just to address that issue, is because if you don't have company-wide integration, it's going to be hard to be believable across all the brands. And being really centrally, you've got a really central supply chain network in that, it's important to have everyone on the side. So yeah, that is the key issue of getting the strategy across. In developing and getting people on board, it's obviously, we've touched on it just before, but positive contagion is one thing, but we've also got a list of different sustainability development goals that have been provided on UN in a handout, which is a good way to see how positive change can affect communities, especially in the way that you operate and deal with these. So it'd be, our recommendation would be to see the positive change that this can happen, I guess, across the communities and that you work in, but then you'll also be able to see that across sales. And we've tried to provide examples of where this has happened with GAP, for instance, where they can really install this belief within their whole supply chain and network of people, so that the staff are empowered to actually take this on board, and have shown initiative after that to actually improve further from where they actually set their standards. And that improved productivity, it improved everything else, which actually led to a synergised effect showing transparency as well. They're by no means perfect in every market, but they report across all of their supply networks, and keeping that consistency is really important just for stakeholder adoption and making sure that the senior management also filter through and believe that throughout their employees. So that's kind of why we backed up the company-wide integration, because yes, you could just look at your key markets and your key brands, but when it's really centrally, you've got that central network and distribution kind of chain, it's important that everyone is on board, or else it's just going to fall to pieces.
And I'm assuming your consulting team can help us with that, should we decide to go?
Yes, we would be more than happy to be briefed on future options.
That's great, thank you. Did you want to kick off?
No, does anyone in the audience, I know that some of our other members of staff might want to ask the question. Is there a pressing question from anybody else here? No? No? All right. Thank
Maybe taking feedback from our members.
There will be feedback after the third.
No, I think we should
do it now.
do it now.
Okay.
So maybe we could ask the first question. How do you think we went as a team? So we just cut now. Cut.
Relax.
Yeah.
Well done, guys.
So the art model says, how did you feel that you went about that? Yeah.
I think we went fairly well. The presentation went relatively smoothly.
Like in terms of myself, when I started speaking, I may have been like, anxiety was definitely there, so I started off a bit shaky. But then as I got through, I was like, yeah, just going through cases, I've done this, I know what I'm talking about, and I think that was fairly the same with most of us.
Did you want to congratulate any particular members of the team on their performance? I mean, did it strike you that there were some sort of standouts in that presentation?
I'd just like to first of all say well done to Scott for answering some of these questions so well.
Yeah.
I handed over to him twice, but I only really worked on the second one, so I thought it would be best to hand over to him again, but he handled it very well.
Yeah, and if we may give some feedback to Scott, Scott stood up. He was really grounded. It was kind of solid. You can trust me. I've got it together. Now he may not feel like that, but that's how he came across to me. So well done. Well done.
Absolutely. I've got to say, I wanted to make eye contact with all of you, and Leanne was the only one to smile back. Because in the moment she momentarily paused and saw that I was looking at her, and then she suddenly smiled, and I thought, that's good, you're going to relax now, and I think you did. And don't forget, when you're presenting to clients, whilst it's a competitive environment, you need to make those connections, and they are human, despite Winston's sort of grumpy exterior. He's only human and has the best interests of the company and its staff and the customers in mind. So I would like to have seen, I thought you did a splendid job, but I'd just like to see you relax more. And sometimes it sounded to me a little scripted. I would like to hear, just talk naturally, just be yourself and highlight. You don't have to, it's written, there's a handout document for all the detailed information, but sometimes it's just a matter of you speaking naturally to the key points that you want to raise.
I have in the past actually come up and taken the cue cards out of someone's hand as they're about to speak. I stopped doing it and somebody nearly burst into tears. I don't want to get that reputation. I don't want to get that reputation. That's the managing director's job. But the point is that if you've got the cue cards, particularly if you've got stuff typed on them, the temptation is to read every word, and then you are looking at the cue cards rather than the lovely human beings who are smiling at you and wondering why you're not smiling back. But all that said, I've never met any of you guys before, and I detected very little nervousness because I don't know you. I mean, Leanne, you said you started off very nervous. I didn't detect that at all. I thought it seemed perfectly professional to me, but then I don't know how you would talk normally.
I'm a little bit more critical, okay, and it probably comes from the fact that I've spent more of my career in industry than I have in academia. The first thing that really struck me was what appeared to be a lack of enthusiasm. Were you really interested in what you were saying? If I'm sitting here as a client that's paying you guys money to do a consultancy or try to decide whether I should give a consultancy project to you, I want to see you really engaged and enthusiastic and confident. And I didn't see that. It was kind of, as Nell said, a little bit scripted, but you didn't even seem as though you were listening to what each other was saying. You know, it's this kind of... And if I see people who are presenting to me like that, and I employ about 10 people in a business, and if people come to me like that, and they don't seem enthusiastic and positive, they don't get employed. And you wouldn't get employed. And I'm not talking about the content. The content was good. But the delivery, I think, lost it. And I think even if your content was the best, you wouldn't have got it because of the presentation. Okay? The other thing I want to comment on, and you guys should know this from being students in class, when you've got so much information on the slides, what do you want me as the audience to do? Do you want me to read the slides, or do you want me to listen to you? Because I can't do both. And you know from sitting in classes that you can't read all the slides. If you're reading the slides, you're not listening to the lecturer. If you're listening to the lecturer, you ignore the slides. So I started off reading the slides. Way too much information. Way. Leave that for the handouts, leave it for the report. You know, when I learned presentation skills 150 years ago, it was like 4 lines per slide and 4 lines per word, or maybe it's gone to 6. Too much information. If you want me to read it, give me time to read it. If it's not important that I read it, don't put it up. Okay? Just put up the highlights. And I stopped reading, I stopped even looking at the slides, and I thought, no, I'm going to listen, because what you're actually saying is much more interesting and actually making sense. So you've got to decide when you're making presentations. You guys, in your first year of employment, will be making presentations in your workplace. So you need to get that skill right. Be confident, articulate, enthusiastic about your topic, know your topic, keep the slides to an absolute minimum, and engage with the audience so the audience, your client, your employer, is really listening to you and is sold by what you're saying.
I'm going to end on a positive note because I'm into, as Braden said, I'm into positive contagion. One of the things I really liked was the professional way in which many of you handed over to the next presenter. And I can't remember, it might have been Natalie. I'll now introduce Kristen, who's going to talk about, blah, 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 I can't remember the financial side, but that was really good. But you could equally have said, thanks Scott, or, you know, thanks Leanne, I'm going to focus now on blah, blah, blah. But just think about yourselves as a team, because it's what we were talking about, well, Faye referred to earlier, about this notion of someone really wants that person, about demonstrating that you are a team. I mean, it's clear that you did all your work, but what I wanted to see was a more relaxed pace in presenting, because you just want to get through the material. But demonstrate that you're a really good team, and you are. So how do you show that? And it's a bit about relaxing and being comfortable and confident about each of the team members who's about to follow, right? So I thought it was great. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentations. And just on the slides, whilst I agree with the CEO, because it's not in my interest not to agree with him, I could be sacked tomorrow. What I did like about the slides was that you thought about them visually and creatively, and that always attracts my attention. The colour, the different elements of it. Yeah, there's probably too much information, but I think you're certainly on the right track, so well done.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. I thought the graphics were really good. Again, too dense, couldn't come to grips with the density of it. But I got the feeling, and because I like the big picture as an individual, I really liked the fact that you had identified options, and you were justifying a particular option, and you had good graphics around those. So even just streamlining those would be fine. And I like Braden's finish, actually. I I can't remember exactly what you said, but there was a real kind of sense of mission around, you know, you need to do this, guys. And I thought it was quietly spoken, but it was like, you know, you need to get your act together. This is a really important issue, and I thought that was a really good finish. So yes, just go back to the, you know, the success model. I pointed to it today, where you've got visuals and you've got simple, clear, emotional. You know, go back to those and see if your slides actually fulfil those criteria. And you probably find that.
We did look at each other when they came up to that.
Oh, did you?
Well,
that's great.
we did that. So.
Yeah, well, that's great, because having experienced this day, you won't do that again, and it will, I'm sure, you know, what you actually thought through, I really like. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.